10 trees in different stages of development, all grown from seed or cutting, or well, in this case air layer, in a pot over the last up to 10 years. Are you wondering how to grow a bonsai from seed or cutting in a pot? I'm going to skip the seed or cutting stage, but in this video I'm going to go through all 10 trees and show you what I do in different stages of development. These of course are all in an early development stage, but it is the early development stage that matters, and slowly over time you'll get to the later stages if you just continuously apply these techniques. I will explain why I am developing them in pots. I'm explaining what are the downsides of developing in the pots, as well as the benefits of growing them in a pot. How do you grow the thickest trunk in a pot in the quickest time? And then, yeah, I think we're at the end of the video. So let's get started. This is a tiny little birch. Of course he's joking, he's never going to keep that. That is one of the comments I got when I first made a little short on this birch that I found in the garden. Now, to be honest, this is a very small plant, but I am growing it as a bonsai and I'm keeping it in a pot all its life. Why? Well, first of all, because I can. Second of all, to prove the point that you can as well. But that is too small to start off with. So let's start off with something else. This is my ginkgo bonsai. I've grown this from seed over the last, I think, 7 or 8 years. And when I posted it in a forum one day, I was told you should have put it in the ground and you would have a very nice fat trunk. True, but what else would I have? I would most likely have ended up with quite a thick trunk, with 3 or 4 very big roots, straight, no taper and hardly any side branches. This tree I have trained from day one on the roots. It has a reasonably nice root spread. If you look at the trunk, it is pretty much flawless. There's only very, very small cuts because every single year during the growing season I let it run. And at the end of the growing season, typically I prune it back. Now this year I have already pruned it, even though we are in the middle of the growing season, and that is costing me a year of thickening up. But I hadn't planted it in the pot properly and it had blown out. So I needed to reduce all the branches. So one of the things to do when you are growing out a bonsai in a pot and you want to develop a trunk. You know, a pot slows down the development of a trunk. Trees don't grow in small pots, you say? Let me pull one out for you. Well, you know, this is a trident maple and it has been growing in a pot all its life. You can see that the trunk is very, very thin. But it has grown considerably this year, considering how small this pot is. This pot is tiny, and in fact it blew from my bench the other day because the whip was so long and it just came out of the pot because once again I forgot to tie this one in. With these small things, they start the growing season, I'm like, it's gonna be stable. So you need to wire them into a pot to make sure that they don't fall over. But why am I growing this out in this tiny little pot? Well, one of the things you see here, this tiny little curved trunk. This trunk, I need to check, but I think this is 7 or 8 years old now. And I've been letting this grow. This is now the 3rd year of extension on this whip. I'm going to prune it off this year. I'm not going to prune it off today because we are in the middle of the growing season. Primary growth is starting to slow down, but secondary growth, the thickening of the trunk, is what happens in the second half of the summer. That's when all this foliage mass is generating sugars, it's generating energy. That is all stored in the trunks and in the branches, and therefore they push. Leaving a sacrifice on until after leaf drop or at the point of leaf drop really gets you another level of thickening on your trunk. Now I don't really want to get a very big trunk, but what I really want is a lot of movement. Now this little side branch is the future trunk of my tree. And what is really nice, by having a long sacrifice and growing it in a pot, this low branch grows really, really slowly. Very close internodes. That means I can make short branches wherever I want. Now this is going to be cut off in fall. Then I will wire this out and also give it nice undulating shape. And at that point I really need to do something on the roots, because you shouldn't do this unless already the pot has come off. Unless your pot is full of roots. But look at how healthy this is. I could now stimulate growth a little bit more for the year to add a tiny little layer of substrate here at the bottom of the pot. And then the roots can push a little bit more and this will grow a little bit more and it will fatten up more. Now it is very important to make sure that the substrate also fills the pot all the way till the sides of the pot, so that no water can percolate along the surface. And then in winter or in spring I'm going to repot properly. Take apart the root ball, prune back the roots and plant it in probably this same pot, because I don't really want to develop it. That's all I'm going to do for this little trident maple at this time of the year. This can now go back into the sun and grow for another couple of weeks. Now this is a Japanese maple that I grew from seed, and I intended it to be flawless. Now I made a mistake, and now I actually have a pruning scar here on the side, so it's not going to be completely flawless. If you look here at the nebari, that is really developing nicely with a few very nice low curves and good fattening, and a tiny little scar here from the past. But besides that, this tree is pretty good. It is also very much overgrown. Again, also in small pots, if watered and fertilized, you can get pretty decent growth. So don't worry, if you want to grow a smaller slender trunk bonsai, you can very much do so in small pots on your balcony, or if you have a little space in your yard. You don't need to grow it out in the full ground. I don't want a very fat top. I want a thin top. Now I have two options. I can go all the way back to this first side branch and cut it off here. Then I have reasonable taper. And I can still with wire manipulate this and turn this into a tiny little tree. Alternatively, if I say no, I want to continue with this very shallow, a very slender trunk line. It has actually reasonable undulations in it. I could go all the way back to this top and say, okay, I'm going to prune off everything that I don't need. Now, what don't I need? I do need my little concave cutters. If you look at these, right, these are all very strong growing. They sit here in the top. Strong growing, it's basically just a side branch, but there is a nice curve here in the main trunk, and this is just an ugly side branch. So I'm going to cut it off, but I'm not going to cut it off flush. I'm going to leave a little bit of a stump. That way this can dry in, and I can later on in the growings, later on in winter, I can clean this out. Then if I look further up, there's all these long whips. Well, none of these long whips I want to keep, so I'm just going to remove them from now, so I can see which ones am I going to keep. Why don't I want to keep them? Well, look at that. All of these have very long internodes. This is all ugly, straight, without any buds on them. Nobody wants that in the top of your tree. You want very, very tight internodes. Fortunately, that is what happens when you grow in a pot. You also get the tight internodes. Only later in the growing season they start pushing. This one comes here from the base, and there's a nice little branch here. This might be a future top or a little side branch. So I can actually remove this whole thing and just leave this tiny little thing here. Let's see how close I can come without damaging the little side branch that still sits there. Look at that. Now that's already starting to look a lot cleaner. And then I still have this one and that one to deal with. Well, this is actually a very strong side branch. A very long internode right here. Look at that. This is something you don't really want in your tree. So we're going to cut that off. But not completely, because the rest here is actually pretty good. And I could of course decide to leave this on so that this branch here fattens more, but this branch is half the thickness of the main trunk, so it needs no fattening at all. I'm just going to cut it here just at these very short internodes. You see here another long internode. So this is a long internode, I don't need it, I'm going to remove it. This has a long internode here, I don't want it. And this whole branch, I don't really need it, so I'm going to cut it back here at the first bud. The first node, there's no buds visible. And here in the top, if you look closely, you'll also see two side branches and then the continuation in the top. And there's now two roots that I could go. And I'm going to go for the most drastic one. I'm going to remove this whole fat middle growth here. What it will do, I then have a nice little side branch here and a new top branch, both of them with very short internodes at the top, and I create a taper and a little bit of movement. And again, I'm cutting it off, leaving a tiny little bit that can dry in over the course of the season. I could actually, this will close over the season, so I'll close this off completely. Just like that. Now I don't want this to extend all that much, so I can just remove the growth here as well. shorten this a little bit. And this is now very far pruned back. The only thing that I still notice is this branch here. Just going to shorten this to the shortest internode. And then to ensure that these branches don't get too strong, I remove some of the leaves. This really reduces this top. This reduces the top strength. And with that I create finer growth for the next season. And this is now almost ready. Here, this is also quite long now that we've pruned everything else, so let's just remove it and leave 1 or 2 buds. This might actually look pretty nice in the future like this. Very slender, but of course this then needs to be drastically reduced. But I'll leave it for now. Wiring I will do around leaf drop. I'm still expecting a lot of secondary growth on these branches, and after fall the wire can stay on until spring and I have less risk of wire scarring. This maple has been in development for about a decade now. It grew also from seed in this pot, and I've always been keeping it very short, and just a few weeks ago I removed a sacrifice branch, and one of the things that you then see happening is that the rest of the tree gets really strong. So the thing to do at this stage, I've already removed a lot of the leaves earlier in the season, so it stays nice and light. But now I see a lot of backbudding occurring. So now it's time to go into the tree, look for buds, and take them away if I don't need them. I don't need more branches here. I need fewer branches. Now, and where do you get these buds? For instance here. So at existing bifurcations you can expect buds if there's a lot of sun, particularly if you're higher up in the tree. And then you need to go in and remove those. So here the same thing, in top you see one of these buds, and I can just push them away with my finger. Now this I need to just do at every single junction, check and remove. Making sure that you don't get a lot of buds growing, because otherwise what you get is what we can see down here. Here in top I've allowed more than 1 branch to develop, and now you get a bit of a clumping and callus formation, and I should consider removing this with a knife. But that's something for next spring. Now I need to think about the source of this little elm. I think it was a cutting, and I think I have a little short on this. But here also you see I am allowing 1 or 2 lower branches to grow really strong. But in top I don't really want this to grow strong. Now unfortunately trees have a tendency to want to grow very strong in the top and not so much at the bottom. So what I need to do at this point to avoid further thickening here in the top is to take out branches like this. This is a branch that is really gained too much strength already, so this is just going to be cut off. And look at that branch. Look at how nice corky texture this already has, and this is a 1-year-old branch, right? Now if you look at the trunk line, this is clearly the main trunk, but these 2 branches really don't have a place in my future trunk line. So either I'm going to go back to this little branch here, or I'm going to go back here and cut this off. Now I've removed a substantial part. This I could of course root as a cutting, but I'm not going to. And here this is still fine. I'm going to allow this. But here is another little branch growing into the canopy, and I'm going to remove that. Then we have this branch here and that branch here. Both of them seem to be getting a little bit long for this tree. I don't want this to grow towards, I want to grow it out from the viewer. And here the same, this is getting a little bit long. And this is getting a little bit long. And this one as well. So this is a nice little mame, whatever you call it in English, tree that I now am giving a much stronger base. Now this moss is really ugly. It's been on here all summer and there's a lot of calcium deposit, but it does help in keeping the root ball nice and moist. And any fertilizer that I put on is digested quite quickly. So I'm going to leave that in place. This was the position in the pot. This will become the position in the pot. And after leaf drop, this is going to be taken off. And then I start the whole process again next year, adding another 1 or 2 centimeters, maybe an inch next year on the crown, and hopefully getting more ramification. Now note, I don't intend this to grow out into a very thick trunk, right? This is going to be in the foreseeable future a very, very small tree. I could have the ambition to grow this out much bigger, also in a pot, but then I'd have to take a little bit of a bigger pot. In a bigger pot, the tree does grow much faster. The internodes also become longer. The branches fatten up faster and therefore you get bigger scars. You don't get these tiny little cuts that I have now, but you get a much bigger trunk a lot faster. So this is really the balance that you're going to have to look for when you're developing your tree. Do I want something with a very big trunk very fast? Or do I like to do the slow route and grow a tiny little tree in a tiny little pot? Because it is really possible to do it this way as well. If I want to grow this that size, I would put a pot very big. Maybe a pot this size. In fact, that is roughly the size that I was saying, right? So a bigger pot results in faster growth and therefore you develop a bigger bonsai faster. This of course over the next 10 years can also grow into a tree this size, but then with very small scars, a lot of extension growth and pruning back, and every year putting it in a slightly bigger pot, creating very, very nice nebagi, because every year you look at the roots, you spread them out, you prune them back, you get very nice ramification there as well. This to show you maple is a very long-term project of mine. It was air layered I think 2 years ago and planted in this pot. It's going to be a little bit of a thin trunk. Yeah, it is for a video. I don't know when this will come out. I also don't know whether I will ever keep this tree once it is developed. I don't think I will. But what you already see, this is in a much bigger pot with quite a reduced volume of foliage. There is not a lot of green on there. That's because I want growth. But immediately what you see these enormous shoots with very, very long internodes. This is a direct consequence of a maple liking the environment, wanting to grow up. So here on top I've already pruned once this year, but again I'll need to do it because there's a lot of side branches popping and I don't want that for this tree. For the rest I'm just going to allow it to grow all the way until fall, because then I've had most of the fattening. None of the branches that are growing right now is really hampering the development of the tree, except for these clusters, and I'll clean that out now. You have a side branch here and you have the top branch coming up. So there's absolutely no need for any growth here on front, and that's basically just going to create scars. So let me just remove that. So that's one cluster of branches gone. And the same is what you can see happening here. There are branches here, there's a bud at the base, which I really don't need because I already have a bifurcation here towards the back. That is a nice little branch. So why do I have another one popping here right next to it on top? I don't want that, so I'm removing this one as well. Now this is opened up and everything that is left can grow. We're still here at this spot, so I have a branch coming to the front, but also one going up. And the one going up, of course, is in my way. This one coming out to the front is fine because this is the leader. But this wants to compete with the leader because it will start growing vertical next year. So here the main takeaway is, if you have your main branches established, look at your tree and remove every growth that you don't really want. And if you have spiders, you can also remove them, or you can leave them in because they're very, very good bug hunters. So every single branch that you don't need in the design and that can hamper the development because it creates a bulge, or later on you have a scar, you need to remove it. But always keep in mind, maybe at some point you want to cut back to that branch. So keep thinking 2 years to 5 years in the future. Now looking at this oak, you see again, I have a very, very long branch. But that is actually something that you should think away. This is the main tree, without the whole sacrifice on there. The sacrifice is just here to fatten up this lower trunk. This will add character, girth, and therefore you get a more tree-like appearance. This in fact is a 10-year project, and in 7 years this is going to come out as a video, I think. What I've done so far is I've removed the taproots, I've planted it up, and then I put it in a deep container. Now that's another thing you can do to speed up the development of your bonsai in a pot, besides taking wide containers. The initial years you can also take a deep container. That's very good for drainage. Therefore you can water more frequently, you can fertilize more frequently, and your tree grows faster. So a deeper pot. I grow everything in this kernel substrate, but if you put it in organics, it will grow faster. The problem is I have 200 rain days a year. I cannot guarantee that my pot ever dries out if I do that. So I use this. I avoid all the root problems in this. But if you don't, then this is a really, really good way. Tall pots, organic matter for 2 or 3 years. This branch is now the second year that's growing. You can see that. Here, these are leaves from this year, otherwise they wouldn't be connected directly to the stem. This is the second push of this year. And in top, you can see I'm now in the third push of this year. And because this is so strong, all these lower branches have just had one little small push. And that's fine by me because I want taper. But now the transition is getting quite big. So in fall, I'm going to cut this off. At that time, I'm also going to add a little bit of wire again. But I've already done that initially, so I have a nice, interesting undulating shape. And of course, the root base is nice because I removed the taproot and I spread out the connection of the roots. If I now take this and I plant it in the ground for 2 or 3 years, I'll probably have 4 or 5 centimeters, 2 inches of trunk in here. But at that time, also all the movement that I put in the trunk is completely gone. And probably this branch will just take over, or this will shoot to the sky and this dies off. So you have less control over what stays alive and what not. The moment I see this really getting weak, and yeah, there's mildew on it, but then I can just cut off this branch. So that's a benefit of growing in a pot. You have much better control over which branches live and which not, because once one gets too strong, you cut it off, you reduce it in size, you reduce the number of leaves. You never have that in the ground. Which is not a problem, because in the ground you are about girth. And these two are crepe myrtles that I rooted from cuttings last year, and I didn't really wire the lower trunks out, which is a bit of a shame. But now at least I can do a little bit of a development video and see what I can do. This is going to be a fairly big tree, I think. So I'm thinking about just wiring this out completely today. And this one I think is going to be a much smaller one. And I am thinking this is going to be the top. This is going to be a sacrifice that I'm just going to let run. This is going to have to be reduced. In spring I will plant these up in a bigger container, because I'm not going to grow these out in the ground. I am going to grow them out in a container, but then in a much bigger container, because that will really aid in developing girth. As a side branch, this was going to be sacrifice, and that was going to be the top, I think. Yeah. So let's make sure the sacrifice branch also goes up, but I don't need all that much wire for it. And this at the top, just a tiny little bit of thin line, not too much, because it's really thin. I don't want to encourage the tree to kill the branch. Now I've done, I made this from the tree, roughly, so you can see a little bit. I might actually curve this a little bit more, can I still? Good. But this now is sacrificed on the back, and as a result this will grow, and once I cut it off, I have the wound impact on that will allow a lot better healing. No, I'll do that another time. Let's see how this develops first. So you have a little top branch, a side branch, and side branch both come forward, and a big sacrifice coming out from the back and then going up. Hopefully aiding in developing this. Shall I not bore you with this and just do it and then show you the result? Something like this I was thinking. Now, key to making tighter curves in material like this is first of all, get them when they're young. The younger the branch, the more flexible it is. But also as you bend, wait a couple of minutes. Bend a little bit, wait a couple of minutes. Pausing between small bends helps enormously in making your bends tighter without breaking the branch. Somehow the fibers in the wood relax a little bit, and then you can bend a little bit further. And really for this birch, I don't really need all that much wire, right? This is just because I can, and I don't want these to develop into very straight branches, but for the next 2 or 3 years I can also still wire these out. Now I'm going to start all the way here at the bottom of the trunk. Ideally I connect the 2 of those, but I find this first section to still be quite straight. So I'm just going to start all the way at the base. I could wait until winter, but I know of birches that they're quite sensitive to wire. And if I would do this work in winter, there's a very big risk that the branch dies off and it just starts with a new shoot in spring. Now I have a hope that because there's foliage on these branches, I'm not going to remove the foliage. It will keep the branches. Now I want this to be a little bit of a side branch. There is a little side branch here that I also want to be on the outside of a curve. And then the tree needs to come up, but not in a straight fashion. And I want it to come a little bit forward and backward so it has movement in 3D. At some point I'll have to plant it in the pot better. But this, I think, is quite reasonable. So this is going to be the future front of my tree. Just like that. And then I'll plant it up properly next year. And then I'll prune this. There you have it. 10 trees in different stages of development, all grown from seed or cutting, or well, in this case air layer, in a pot over the last up to 10 years. Just to show you, yes, it can be done. It does take more time, and trunks might not get as fat as you would expect in the full ground, but you have more control over the movement of the branches. You have more control over the size of the pruning scars. You get better nebari because you really can pay attention to it, except for when you forget. Yeah, grown bonsai. From seedling or cutting in a pot over multiple years, this is what you do in summer.